In a world quick to judge, they found something rare, a love built on respect, quiet strength, and a promise neither dared to break. There was something about the way she moved through the room, not hurried, but deliberate, like she belonged to a quieter rhythm of life. I first noticed her in that small cafe, where the sunlight slanted through the windows just so, catching the gentle silver strands that framed her face. She wasn't flashy, but there was a quiet confidence in the way she held herself, a natural grace that drew the eye without demanding it. When our eyes met for the first time, it wasn't with the usual flicker of attraction or nervousness I'd expected. Instead, there was a steady warmth in her gaze, like the calm steadiness of a lighthouse guiding me safely to shore. I found myself surprised by how at ease I suddenly felt, as if the noise of the world faded just enough to leave room for something real, something human. Our first words were simple. She spoke with kindness, her voice low and steady, not the exaggerated politeness one might expect when meeting someone new. She listened, truly listened, when I spoke, her attention never wavering or distracted. There was no pretense, no need to impress or perform. She treated me like I mattered, not as someone to be measured or judged, but as a person whose thoughts and feelings deserved space. I remember the moment she handed me that book, a small gesture, really, but the brush of her fingers against mine lingered longer than necessary. It wasn't a grand touch, it was the kind of contact that speaks volumes in its quietness. I felt grounded, like I wasn't just a younger man fumbling through life, but someone worthy of respect. She carried the weight of her years not as a burden but as a kind of quiet pride. Her eyes held stories, stories I couldn't yet understand, but she didn't try to hide them. There was vulnerability there, yes, but also strength. The kind of strength that comes from living fully, from knowing both joy and pain, and still choosing kindness. For my part, I was younger in years but not naive. I had my own scars, my own doubts tucked just beneath the surface. Yet, in her presence, those doubts softened. I wanted to show her who I really was, beyond the usual bravado or awkward attempts to prove myself. Around her, I could just be, no masks, no pretenses. Our conversation was slow, measured, filled with pauses that weren't uncomfortable but inviting. She never rushed me to fill the silence. Instead, there was a shared respect in the space between our words, as if we both knew something meaningful was beginning, quietly, carefully. That first meeting was not dramatic, no fireworks or grand declarations. It was something far rarer, the feeling that here was someone who saw me, not just looked at me, someone who treated me with a quiet dignity, and in doing so, made me want to be worthy of that grace. And so it began, this subtle dance of recognition, two people bridging a world of difference through simple acts of respect and kindness, discovering in each other a refuge from the rush of life. The days that followed our first meeting slipped by like pages turning in a well-loved book, familiar, comforting, yet full of new discoveries. We found ourselves seeking those quiet spaces where conversation could flow without urgency, a corner table at the cafe bathed in golden afternoon light, a shaded park bench where the breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine, or the soft hum of a late-evening bookstore where the world outside seemed to pause. What surprised me most was how naturally our moments together unfolded, without the usual awkwardness that often accompanies new acquaintances. There was a rhythm to it, a gentle give and take that felt less like courting and more like two souls learning the contours of a friendship that promised something deeper. She didn't hide the subtle grace that came with her years, the fine laugh lines that crept at the corners of her eyes when she smiled, or the way her fingers would absent-mindedly tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, revealing a glimpse of soft skin, touched by a lifetime of stories. It wasn't just beauty in the conventional sense, it was a quiet radiance, a warmth that invited me in rather than dazzled from afar. I caught myself paying attention to things I never noticed before, the way her voice softened when she recounted a fond memory, the gentle curve of her smile when she caught me watching her, as if sharing a secret only we understood. And she noticed me too, my earnest attempts to listen, the way my eyes would linger on her when she spoke, not out of infatuation, but because I was drawn to the sincerity I found in her presence. One afternoon, as the sun dipped lower and cast long shadows across the park, she reached out to touch my forearm lightly, just a brief, accidental brush at first, but the kind of touch that sends a ripple beneath the skin. I felt a warmth spread through me, a quiet affirmation that this wasn't just a casual friendship. Her hand stayed there a moment longer than necessary, steady and reassuring, and my heart responded in kind. There was a softness in those shared silences, too, comfortable enough to let the world fall away, leaving just the two of us in a space that felt safe and unhurried. I began to realize how rare it was to be with someone who treated me not as a younger man to be guided or protected, but as a person with thoughts worth hearing, feelings worth honoring. She never tried to fill the gaps with small talk or distractions. Instead, she let the quiet linger, as if giving me permission to be myself, imperfect, searching, hopeful. And I, in turn, began to cherish the way her eyes would meet mine with that steady warmth, silently saying she was here, truly here. These shared moments became the foundation of something delicate yet profound. In a world that often judged us by numbers, age, experience, expectation, we were building a connection that was measured not by years, but by the gentle care we showed each other. Slowly, the distance between us narrowed, not with haste or force, but with the quiet certainty that comes from being seen, and in return, choosing to see someone else, fully and without reservation. The quiet comfort we had found in each other began to open doors I hadn't dared approach before. It was in the way she talked about her past, not with bitterness or regret, but with a gentle honesty that felt like a whispered invitation. One evening, as the soft glow of a table lamp painted warm shadows across her face, she shared a story about a time when life had felt heavier than she could bear. Her voice, usually steady and composed, carried a fragile edge, as if the memories were old wounds still tender beneath the surface. I listened, captivated not just by her words, but by the courage it took to reveal that part of herself. It wasn't a dramatic confession or a plea for sympathy, it was simply the truth, laid bare with quiet dignity. The way her fingers nervously traced patterns on the table, the slight catch in her breath when she paused, the way her eyes flickered with a mix of sorrow and resilience, all of it made me feel like I was witnessing something sacred. For a long moment, I didn't know what to say. The usual impulse to fix or soothe felt misplaced. So instead, I let the silence hold us, letting my steady gaze be the only response, a silent assurance that I was there, that her vulnerability was not a burden but a gift. Then it was my turn. Tentatively, I shared fragments of my own story, the doubts that shadowed my younger years, the uncertainty that often gnawed at my confidence. I spoke of moments when I felt invisible or out of place, and how those feelings lingered even when I tried to hide them beneath a veneer of composure. She listened without interruption, her eyes reflecting a deep understanding that transcended words. In that exchange, the years between us seemed less like a chasm and more like a bridge, a path woven from shared fragility and strength. Our age difference, once a quiet backdrop, took on new meaning as we realized how much we had both endured, how much we had both learned about life and love. There was a moment when our hands found each other across the table, hesitant at first, then holding tighter, as if anchoring ourselves in this newfound closeness. Her touch was warm and steady, a grounding presence that told me she wasn't going anywhere. I felt the pulse of her heartbeat through her fingertips, a steady rhythm that calmed the storm inside me. We spoke less after that, but the silence between us was fuller than ever. It was the kind of silence that speaks volumes, a language of trust and shared vulnerability. In that quiet space, I saw her not just as a woman older than me, but as a person who had faced her own battles and chosen to keep moving forward. That evening, when she stood to leave, she brushed her hand lightly against my cheek, a gesture so soft it barely registered, yet it left a warmth that lingered long after she was gone. I realized then that something had shifted. We had crossed an invisible line, stepping into a territory where hearts were no longer guarded but gently exposed. And in that exposure, there was a fragile beauty, a promise that we might find, in each other, not just affection, but a rare and precious kind of understanding that it wasn't in grand declarations or passionate outbursts, but in the small, almost imperceptible details, the way the space between us seemed to shrink without a word, the soft catch in her breath when our eyes met across a crowded room. One evening, we found ourselves sitting close on a worn leather couch in her softly lit living room. The fading light from the window cast a warm amber glow, wrapping us both in a quiet intimacy. She reached for a book on the coffee table and handed it to me, her fingers brushing mine just long enough to make the air between us hum. That simple touch sent a flutter through my chest, a delicate reminder that what we shared was shifting into something deeper. Her eyes held a softness I hadn't seen before, like a secret smile lingering beneath the surface. When she spoke, her voice was lower, more vulnerable, and I noticed the way her lips parted just slightly, as if caught in a hesitation she didn't quite want to voice. I felt a magnetic pull toward her, not just because of her beauty, but because of the layers I glimpsed, the tenderness beneath her confidence, the unspoken longing that mirrored my own. I wanted to reach out, to take her hand, to hold her close, but the moment held me back. Instead, I let my fingers trail along the edge of the couch, close but not quite touching her. It was a delicate dance of restraint, where every glance, every slight movement, carried weight. The room was filled with quiet sounds, the soft ticking of a clock, the rustle of pages as she turned them, the faint murmur of distant traffic outside. Yet in that stillness, every heartbeat felt amplified, every breath shared like a secret. She leaned in to whisper something about the book, and her breath brushed against my cheek, warm and inviting. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, savoring the sensation, the tender closeness, the undeniable pull between us. It was a moment suspended in time, where the world narrowed down to just the two of us and the fragile space we occupied together. Neither of us broke the silence, but the tension was palpable, a gentle, simmering fire that promised more, yet demanded patience. I could feel the way her hand twitched near mine, hovering in that sweet uncertainty, and I knew she felt it too. This was the kind of longing that doesn't need words. It lives in the pauses, the lingering glances, the quiet breaths shared in proximity. It was respect and desire entwined, a promise that when the time was right, we would cross the distance not with haste, but with the care that our connection deserved. As the evening wore on, I realized how much I valued this slow unfolding, this gradual drawing together of two hearts learning to trust. There was something sacred in the restraint, in honoring the delicate tension without forcing it. Because sometimes, love isn't about rushing to the finish line. It's about savoring the moments in between, the soft touches, the whispered words, the silent promises carried on a glance. And in that quiet tension, I felt the first true stirrings of something I hoped would last. The closer we grew, the more the world's silent judgments weighed on us, though neither of us said it aloud at first. It wasn't just about the age between us, though that was there, a quiet, unspoken boundary. It was the way society might see us, an unlikely pairing, a story some might misunderstand or dismiss before ever knowing what truly connected us. I remember sitting beside her one evening, the soft glow of city lights spilling through the window, casting shadows that danced across her face. We were close, closer than ever before, but there was a tension that hadn't been there, a hesitation, a pause that felt heavier than the silence itself. My hand reached slowly toward hers, the movement tentative, almost afraid. For a moment, I stopped myself, caught between wanting to bridge the gap and fearing what it might mean if we were seen. I could feel the flutter of nerves, not just in me, but somewhere deep in her too. The years that separated us weren't just numbers, they were a reminder of how different our worlds had been. She looked at me then, her eyes full of a quiet storm. There was vulnerability there, a flicker of pain I hadn't seen before. The vulnerability wasn't about me or us, it was about everything outside our little bubble, the whispers, the assumptions, the invisible weight of expectations. I could almost hear the words unsaid, "Is this right? Is this allowed? Will this hold?" For a moment, the uncertainty threatened to undo what we'd carefully built. I pulled my hand back, a sudden tightness gripping my chest. But then she reached out, not in grand gesture, but with a gentle, steady touch that spoke louder than any words. Her fingers curled softly around mine, grounding me, reminding me that what mattered was the truth between us, not the noise beyond. She squeezed once, a silent reassurance that we were in this together, two people choosing to believe in something rare and real, despite the doubts that lingered in the edges of our minds. We didn't rush to talk about it, the conversation was slow to come, filled with pauses and quiet admissions. She shared the moments when she'd felt judged, dismissed, or misunderstood because of the gap in our years. I opened up about my own fears, the fear of never being taken seriously, of being seen as too young or inexperienced to understand the depth she carried so effortlessly. There was no bitterness, only a shared honesty that knit us closer. It was in those fragile confessions that we found strength not in defying the world, but in choosing each other regardless. The room felt heavy with emotion, but also with hope. Because in acknowledging our fears, we began to dissolve them. We promised to face whatever came next side by side, no matter how uncertain the road. And in that delicate moment of hesitation, I realized that love wasn't about perfection or ease. It was about courage, the courage to hold on even when the world whispers you should let go. The night stretched on, the city's hum a distant backdrop as we sat quietly, hands entwined, hearts beating in unison. It was the kind of moment that didn't demand words, but held a promise that would carry us through whatever came next. The hesitation that once hovered between us began to melt away, not with thunderous declarations or dramatic gestures, but through the quiet courage of choosing each other again, and again. It was a gentle, deliberate step forward, one that felt like breathing after holding your breath for too long. One evening, we found ourselves alone in her cozy apartment, the soft light from a single lamp casting long shadows that danced along the walls. The air was thick with everything we hadn't yet said, the emotions too complex for words but too powerful to ignore. I could feel the steady rhythm of her breathing beside me, the subtle rise and fall of her chest like a tender heartbeat I wanted to keep close. Without thinking, my hand reached for hers, slow and careful, as if afraid the moment might shatter if I moved too fast. Her fingers curved gently around mine, warm and sure. There was no need to speak, the touch itself was a promise, a silent vow of respect and devotion. She leaned into me then, her head resting lightly against my shoulder. The warmth of her cheek against my skin was a balm to a heart that had known too much uncertainty. In that simple closeness, I felt a peace I hadn't dared hope for, the quiet steadiness of someone who chose to stay, even when the world outside was loud with doubt. Our eyes met, and in her gaze I saw the reflection of everything I felt but hadn't voiced, admiration, tenderness, and something deeper, a desire to build something lasting, not rushed but real. I spoke softly then, my voice steady despite the flutter in my chest. I told her how much she meant to me, not just as a presence in my life, but as the person who made me want to be better, braver, more open. She smiled, a slow, knowing smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes, and I saw a flicker of joy and relief that mirrored my own. She returned the sentiment with words that carried the weight of experience and hope. She told me how rare it was to find someone who treated her not as a prize or a challenge, but as a person, with kindness, patience, and genuine care. The age between us, once a shadow of doubt, now felt like a bridge that connected two hearts willing to understand one another. We stayed like that for a long time, hands intertwined, bodies close but not rushing, letting the moment unfold naturally. The room seemed to shrink around us, the outside world fading until it was just us, wrapped in a cocoon of shared warmth and quiet affection. She brushed a stray lock of hair behind my ear, her fingers lingering for a heartbeat longer, and I felt a shiver of something tender pass through me. There was no need for grand gestures or passionate declarations, this was love in its purest form, measured not by intensity but by steady, unwavering presence. For the first time, I truly understood what it meant to treat someone like a queen, not by spoiling or idolizing, but by honoring her whole being, her strength and vulnerability alike. And in her gentle acceptance, I found a home for my own heart. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, casting a gentle glow across the room where we sat side by side. The quiet hum of the city outside was distant, like a world we had stepped away from, if only for a moment. Our hands were intertwined, fingers fitting naturally as if they had always belonged there, and in that simple touch, I felt a profound sense of belonging. There was no rush, no grand plans shouted into the dawn. Instead, there was a calm certainty between us, the kind that comes from knowing that whatever storms may come, we had found in each other a steady refuge. The age between us, once a barrier clouded with doubts and fears, now felt like a gentle current carrying us forward, blending our lives in a way neither of us could have predicted but both quietly welcomed. She shifted slightly, leaning her head against my shoulder, and I could feel the warmth of her breath, steady and familiar. I turned to meet her eyes, soft, radiant, and full of a promise that needed no words. In that gaze was everything we had shared, the hesitations, the quiet conversations, the moments of vulnerability, and the growing desire to simply be close. Outside, the world carried on, its judgments and expectations fading to insignificance in the light of what we had built. It was a love that didn't demand perfection or conformity but thrived on acceptance, respect, and the delicate weaving of two lives. If there were others, friends or confidants who had quietly watched this unusual bond take shape, they were part of the story too. Not as obstacles or rivals, but as companions who understood the rare connection we had forged. They came not to complicate, but to support, to share in the warmth that now surrounded us all. We spoke softly of the days ahead, not with grand declarations but with the gentle hope of partners ready to face life's uncertainties together. There was an unspoken agreement to move at our own pace, savoring the moments, allowing the future to unfold naturally. I remembered how she once told me that love, at its best, is a quiet promise, a commitment made not just in words, but in the way we show up for each other every day. And now, sitting here with her, I understood that promise more deeply than ever. Her hand tightened slightly in mine, a small gesture of reassurance and joy. I smiled, feeling a warmth that went beyond the touch, a warmth born of knowing that here, in this shared space, we had found something rare, a love that treated each of us as whole, worthy, and deeply seen. As we rose to greet the day, the sunlight wrapped around us like a soft embrace, carrying the silent vow that whatever the world might say, we would continue to walk this path side by side, not defined by years or expectations, but by the quiet strength of a bond built on respect and heart. And in that simple truth, I found my forever.